chapter 1, verse 19, it says, "So the Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the mountaineers, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland, because they had chariots of iron." I'm going to continue reading because one of my favorite characters in the Bible is the next guy. "And they gave Hebron to Caleb, as Moses had said. Then he expelled from there the 3 sons of Anak." Caleb wanted that land. He went to Moses and made sure he got a promise. When we get there, I'm going to get this place. Why? He started out a man in his 40s. They've got to the promised land. Now he's in his 80s. He realizes, man, I'm an old man, but I want to see what the Lord's going to do. So give me the land where the giants are. I want to see what the Lord's going to do. It's not going to be me. I'm an old man now, but I want to be there and watch what the Lord does. He served the Lord for 40 years. 40 years earlier, it was just him and Joshua who said, let's go. God has given us this land. Here's proof as they went in as spies and they came back with the bounty of produce that was just unbelievable and said, yes, this is the land flowing with milk and honey. What are we doing standing here? Let's go. But because the other 10 spies came back saying, man, there's giants in that land. They got walled-in cities. They got armies. Man, our poor children are going to get wiped out. Fear will sweep through like a forest fire. It'll just, and that's what happened. And so the Lord said, okay, out to the desert with you. I'll wait you out. And the ones that you were saying, well, these our poor children, your children are going to be the ones to inherit the land. I'm going to wait you out. So for 40 years, he waited them out till all those grown men that were able to be at war, when they left Egypt, they all had to die. And it was their next generation that's coming into the land. Well, this is that next generation. And they started out good. They came in. Joshua led them in. And as the Lord told Joshua, no king, no one is going to be able to stand before you, just like as Moses. I'm going to be with you. Nobody's going to be able to withstand you. Pretty good promise from God. You can have a lot of confidence with that. And that's exactly what happened. But then he grew old and he died. Well, they handed the baton off. And they started out well, and conquest after conquest after conquest. But let me ask you a question. Why does the fact that this army has chariots of iron, why is that a problem? The God who can part seas, the God who can spin time backwards, well, why is this an issue? I don't think it was an issue. I think it was more of an issue with them. And they got distracted. And they started making excuses. Well, we couldn't really do all of this. These people, we told them they had to leave, and they didn't go. And we actually went out and fought them a couple times, and they wouldn't leave. So, but then if you continue reading, after that, starting in verse 21, all this thing started, all you start seeing is they didn't do this, and they didn't complete the mission. They went there and they started making all kinds of reasons why this didn't happen and why this didn't happen. Verse 28 it says, "And it came to pass when Israel was strong," so get that, remember that they put the Canaanites under tribute, but they did not completely drive them out. They had kind of lost their way a little bit. They were more interested in, well, let's just make a deal with them. Hey, we'll get some free labor out of them. But that's not what the Lord's will was. The Lord's will was chase them out of there. In fact, he would be the one chasing them out. You just take the steps, say the words, do what you're supposed to do. But they had lost the will to fight over this. And they were more interested in, hey, let's just make things comfortable. I don't want to be doing all this anymore. Can't we just relax a little bit here? They finished the job not finished. These people have been a pain in that area ever since. Because the people of God did not follow through with what God told them to do. I have a question. Are there issues in your life that you know aren't right, but these things have got a stronger hold on you than maybe you wished? And my encouragement to you is just don't get tired and give up the fight. Actually, let me restate that. Give up the fight. Don't take the fight yourself to them. Let the Lord be the one fighting for you. Let him be doing that. Because if it's all about our will and our strength, us going in our own strength, it's going to wear us down. And then especially if it's something that we just don't think we can shake loose, well, maybe that's just not going to happen but in your own strength. Maybe you need God to intervene. Let him do this. Proverbs 3 tells us what? Don't count on your own thinking. Don't count on your own intellect. Wholly lean onto God. Totally give it to him and give him wiggle room to work, and he'll direct your path. He'll show you what you need to do. But you're not going to be able to do this just in your own way, because it's just not going to work that way. And I think, as we're going to see here today, one of these, actually, you know what? I'm going to go through the book of Judges has one thing that just keeps repeating itself over and over and over again. Israel started out, they would be serving God. Everything's going great. And then there's this curious phrase that keeps coming back. That they would do evil in the sight of the Lord. They forsake God. And they followed pleasure. Their own way. And then they'd be overrun. And next thing you know, they're in servitude or they're in slavery again. In the middle of all this circumstance, they finally cry out to God. And they turn and repent for the things that they had done. And God would raise up a judge, a deliverer for them. And that would go for a while. Then they get distracted again. And next thing you know, it says that they would do evil in the sight of the Lord. God is faithful. The amazing thing is, God's word tells us he's faithful and just both at the same time. He's faithful to his word. He's faithful to us. If we'll just come to him on his terms and just lay down the fight and give ourselves over to him. He's faithful and just. His justice is going to be met. That's why us as Christians, that's why Jesus had to die on a cross. He had to come in the way he did, and he had to die the way he did, because God's justice had to be met out for us. Because God's just not going to look the other way on the whole sin issue. He wants us to give him our lives, give him our heart, so that we can experience him. And we can experience him in a whole different way than we ever had before. We're going to be in chapter 6 eventually when we get there. I want to just go over a couple things about some of the other these judges that the Lord had raised up. To begin with the first one, Othniel. His biggest claim to fame actually was he was the nephew of Caleb. He married his daughter. That was it, but the Lord used him as the first judge. Ehud. His biggest thing was, you would think it would start out with, well, he's handicapped because his right hand is withered, and it says that he's left-handed, but the Lord used that issue to gain him audience with this king that he needed to overthrow. God can take any one of our weaknesses, what the world or ourselves may see as a handicap. If we'll just give our life and trust him, he can use anybody. As long as you're breathing, he can use you, and he will use you. So he used him to deliver the children of Israel from Elgon, the king of Moab. Shamar. I'm going to mispronounce this game again. Shamgar. His thing that he was good at, he was good with an ox goad. Okay, that was his. And he was used as a deliverer because he was good with an ox goad. He killed 600 Philistines with that ox goad. And he was used as a deliverer for the children of Israel. And then we come to Deborah. Again, think about the culture. Think about that time back then. She's a woman. She's a wife. She's a mother. These things would be things that would kind of remove her from consideration of her roles that she takes because she is serving God as a military advisor. Think about that. And we're told in there that she's also a prophetess. And she's the only one that's mentioned in the book of Judges that judges the whole nation of Israel. The rest of these things are just little regional, just their local ministry areas. When the one who was supposed to be leading this military campaign, Barak, tells her, you know what? I'll go, but only if you go with me. So she questions him, hey, aren't you supposed to be gathering an army to go take care of this and chase these people out of here? And his answer was, I'll go, but only if you go. So what's the answer she gives him? So she says to him, verse 9 in chapter 4, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, there will be no glory for you in the journey you are taking, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah rose and went with Barak to Kadesh. She could have very easily just said, you know what, that's supposed to be his job to do. But she didn't. She stepped out in faith, trusting God, and to the point where, because he wouldn't do his job, he just needed a little encouragement. But even then, he didn't just take over and, oh, you know what, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. The Lord still used her. And it wasn't just this instant. If you just read through the chapters in there, the Lord used her pretty powerfully and for the whole nation. That they would bring issues to her for her to judge. She's a wife and a mother, and she's doing things to protect her family. And one of these things is these people need to not be here. And so, Barak, what are you doing here? Why aren't you going to do your job? And if it takes me to go with you, well then, that's exactly what's going to happen. I'll go with you, but just be warned ahead of time. There's no glory in this for you, okay, because you should have done this. And what are the people actually going to remember? Here we are thousands of years later. What do we actually remember of that whole battle? Deborah. We remember her. And that's the way it works. So this thing just continued going over and over again. They had lost their way. They had given up hope because they turned their back on the God who delivered them into this land. They took their eyes off him. They stopped serving him in the way that he called them to serve, by faith, trusting him. Remember this, though. They were still a religious people. They just weren't serving God. They still had their ceremonies. They still had their rites. But they weren't serving God. And in God's word is true. What they ended up doing is bowing down to the different Baals. The worshiping the gods of the Midians, worshiping the gods of the Canaanites, worshiping the gods of all these different people that they were supposed to rid the land of. And there they sat with them. And then next thing you know, we find them, they're worshiping there. They're bowing down to these statues. They're bowing down to these things. Well, by the time we get to chapter 6, we meet a man named Gideon. A man God is going to use as a powerful deliverer. But how do we meet Gideon? Gideon has an issue. Just like all the rest of those judges before him, they each had their own little issues they were having to work through, their own things they were having to process through. Gideon had a real severe problem with fear. I'll even use the word coward. He was, at different times, you'll see it as you read through this, it keeps popping back up. He wants to trust God, but this thing, he's just fearful of different things. In fact, when we meet him in verse 11 of chapter 6, where's he at? He's threshing wheat, but where? He's inside the wine press, down below the ground level. Well, how do you thresh? You got to get a winnowing fork and pitch these things up in the air, and hopefully, usually you do this on a mountainside or on a hillside, so the wind will catch it and get the chaff and take it away, and then you have what you're really after that'll land down. He's below ground. He's hiding because he's fearful. Because what had happened, if you read earlier in the chapter, these people that were ruling over them that should not even have been there, they were just, the children of Israel were hiding in caves. And they're waiting up in the mountains. They're just fearful of going down to the lowlands where the good parts are at, because they've been chased there. Because now they're servants. And what happened, they would plant crops, and these people around there would wait till the crops come up, and then they're just going to swoop down and just destroy the crops and come in there with their livestock and their people and be like a swarm of locusts and just leave them nothing. And they're starving, and they're discouraged, and they finally... verse 6 of chapter 6 says, So Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. And it came to pass, when the children of Israel cried out to the Lord because of the Midianites,
that the Lord sent a prophet to the children of Israel, who said to them, Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up out of Egypt and brought you out to the house, out of the house of bondage, and I delivered you out of the land of the Egyptians and out of the hand of all the oppressors, all those who oppressed you, and drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the God of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But you have not obeyed my voice. This is the reason why they're there. God's not done with them, but he's calling to them to remember, here's the reason you're in this situation you're at is because you disobeyed, you walked away from me. Let's go back and let's rehearse this. Where were you when I sent your first deliverer? You were in slavery for 400 years. And I raised up a deliverer for you. But what happened? You know what happened before Moses died? As they're right there at the promised land. God takes Moses aside and he takes him up to the hillside and he says, I'm going to show you the promised land. And he could see all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. He could see all the way to northern Israel. He could see all the way down over into Egypt. He could see the whole land of Israel. And then he tells him, this is the place. But guess what's going to happen? When you die, they're going to forget everything you taught them for the last 40 years. That's kind of like a sucker punch. Boom, for 40 years he labored with them and got discouraged by them. And he had to, many times, there was a time when he said, I'm done with them. They're your people, God. I can't take this anymore. And there was even a time when God said, you know what, you're right. Sit down. I'm going to wipe them all out and I'll start over with you. And that was just trying to get Moses to shake his shoulders a little bit. Well, hold on, God. Well, let's not go there. Let's not do that. Okay, let's get back at it. So there they are. And God even tells Moses, they're going to forget everything. So, but that wasn't that time yet. Joshua takes over for him, takes him into the land. And God even tells Joshua, just like I was with Moses, I'm going to be with you and nobody's going to be able to stand up to you. So go forward and follow and do what I say. And be of good cheer. Don't be afraid. Don't let fear come into your area. Chase it out. You just remember, stay focused on me. Well, now we're past that generation. And now another generation arose that did not know the Lord, didn't know why. Says something, though. Why didn't they know? Their parents should have been all about pouring into them. The whole reason we're here is because of what the Lord has done for us. But that generation rose and they didn't know. So here we have Gideon. Verse 11, it says, Now the angel of the Lord came and sat upon a terebinth tree that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon thrashed wheat in the winepress in order to hide from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, The Lord is with you, mighty man of valor. I don't know if that was tongue-in-cheek. I don't think so. I think what the Lord was doing was addressing him not in his current state. He was addressing him and who he's calling him to be. And you know what? The Lord, when he looks at us, if we've given him our heart, if we've surrendered to Jesus Christ, he doesn't look at us as a child of Adam. He looks at us as a righteous son or daughter, wrapped in a robe of righteousness, what the Bible tells us, which is Christ Jesus. That's how he sees us. Now, you may not see yourself that way because of circumstance in your life, because of things that are going on in your life. Trust God. He knows what he's talking about. He loves you passionately, more than you can even think about. And he has a plan for your life. And it's not just to get to heaven. He has a plan for your life right now. If you're breathing, if you're taking up oxygen, he has a plan to use you for his kingdom's cause. Gideon couldn't see that yet. He had lost all hope. Verse 13, And Gideon said, O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then is all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken and delivered us into the hand of the Midianites. Then the Lord turned to him and said, Go in this manner of yours, and you will save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? Here's the thing he needed to remember. He needed to remember this. I'm sending you. Remember that. I don't care what comes your way. Remember this. I'm sending you. And remember who I am. So it's not about you. It's about me and what I'm going to do using you. So he said, O my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest of Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. I am a loser. Don't bet on me. There's not. What are you sure you got the right person? Look at me. I'm hiding in underground. And you're calling me this mighty man of valor, this warrior. You sure you got the right person? And the Lord said to him, Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man. You're not going to have to worry about this whole army. It's going to be like a one-on-one fight, and I'm going to be there with you. So just trust me. Then he said to him, If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who talk with me. He needed to have some kind of intervention, you could say. He needed to experience God. He had heard about God, but all his circumstances around him said, if there is a God, he's abandoned us. And so remember this. Remember where he's starting out. And he's processing this along the way. He just received a message that kind of sounds kind of crazy to him. First off, there's got to be more. There's got to be somebody else. This isn't the first time that something like this happened. What was Moses' response when the Lord told him to go to Egypt? What was his response? You got the wrong guy. Okay? First off, you want me to go speak to the most powerful man in the world. Can you hear me? I stutter. I can't speak right. I'm not the guy who you want representing you. Did God say, oh, all right, I guess we'll go to plan B? No, you're going. Stick your hand in, pull it out, okay? Realize who I am. I'm the one I will be there before you. I'm going to be the one doing all these things. And then he kind of tipped his hand a little bit. By the way, things are not going to go the greatest. Everything that you're going to go there with, he's going to reject until I kill his son. Then that will grab him. Then that'll get his attention. But that wasn't any excuse to say, well, deliver the message completely as I'm going to tell you, because it's going to be like walking up and slapping him in the face. You let my people go. Wow, tell that to the most powerful man in the world who could snap your head off with just a flick of his hand, and he could have people come in and drop you. You need to be focused. You need to realize who you're talking to. I'm going to be the one who's going to do this. By the way, where's this conversation taking place? He's talking to a bush burning. This is not a normal thing that's going on. God is appearing to him in a whole different way than he's ever experienced before. He had heard stories, but now this is reality. So he needed to trust God, but he needed to experience God. And God was calling him. And calling him, changing his name a little bit. He's going to change his name again here in a little bit later, because as he's experiencing God and watching what God is doing, but believe me, what's happening here is God is challenging him to trust him by faith. And he's saying, you know what, show me a sign, please. I don't even know who you are, really. And you're asking this thing of me, show me something that I have faith in. Show me that it's you who are talking to me. Do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you and bring out my offering and set it before you. And he said, I will wait until you come back. That's the angel telling him, okay, I'll wait. I got nowhere else to go. So Gideon went and he prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot, and he brought them to him under the terebinth tree and presented them to him. You need a sign? Here's your sign. The angel of the Lord said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on a rock and pour the broth. And he did so. And the angel of the Lord put out the end of his staff that was in his hand, and he touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire rose up out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. Here's your sign. How do you process that? He wanted proof that God was with him, that this message was from God. Here's the message. Okay, I think he experienced something and it just lit him up. Okay, I can go now because it's not me. Me, I'm a fearful guy. I'm not going to, I'll hide under the ground. But God has given me a message. God has given me a mission, and he's proved it to me. He didn't send somebody and say, hey, I'm choosing you. He did something in his life that changed him. But you'll see that fear wants to keep coming back again. That's how things work in our life. The enemy doesn't just leave just because we tell him, I'm a Christian now. And many times he's like, oh yeah? Well, we'll see about that. That just seems to me, I'm turning up the heat a little bit. But just remember this, the Lord is with you. He's never going to leave you. He's never going to forsake you. When he starts out there, he believed that the Lord had forsaken them. Why? Well, look what they had done. They had abandoned God. He had beginning and told him, I'm never going to break my covenant with you. I will never break it. Their problem is they kept breaking it. And by his grace, he kept raising up other people to bring them back. And then they would get distracted and they would forget. And next thing you know, they're worshiping other gods who weren't even gods. They were just idols. Gideon had a new sense of security in his relationship with God. So Gideon built an altar there and he called it Yahweh Shalom. The Lord is peace. The word shalom has many meanings. Sometimes hello, be at peace, prosperity, friendship. Gideon had discovered a new personal relationship with God. And he put the name in that place to reflect that what was going on. So what happens? He starts out, okay, has given me a mission. He's preparing me. Verse 25, it says, now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has cut down, the wooden image and the image that is beside it. You know, sometimes you inherit things from your family that are not of God. And what are you going to do with it when you come to God? Well, here God is challenging him with this. He knew his father had carved these things out, and God is sending him to tear them down. Not just tear them down, we're going to do a replacement. Tear that down, set up this altar, and do a sacrifice on it. Do you think he might have had one or two thoughts about, man, I wonder how my dad's going to take this? Whoa. But what was his father handing off to him? His father had turned away from God, and he's carving these images out and worshiping these things and setting them up in places of false worship. And this is his first job. Go tear it down. Well, he's going to have to trust God on this. Gideon took 10 men with him, his servants, and he did as the Lord said. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he went by night. He still got that fear factor in him. The Lord's still working with him, though. The Lord didn't just say, look, trust me or I'm out of here. Think about that, because how many of us, if the Lord is called and he's doing a work on us, but it's a work in progress. We're not the final product right away. We're learning things on the way, and we fall down, we scrape our knees, we've got to get back up, and the Lord dusts us off and puts us back in the fight. This was just the first one. He's learning along the way, because there's 135,000 men waiting for a battle that the Lord's going to send him in the middle of. Let's start him here. This is going to be a challenge to him. Challenge right down inside his soul, inside of his gut. God, you want me to do what? Okay, he assured, again, he gave him a sign. Here's a sign, I'm with you. Here's your proof. Now follow up. So he did. Verse 28. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, there was the altar of Baal torn down, and the wooden image beside it was cut down. And the second bull was being offered on the altar which had been built. So they said to one another, who has done this thing? And when they had inquired and asked, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing. Then the men of the city said to Joash, bring out your son that he may die, because he has torn down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the wooden image which was beside it. So what's the father going to do? Okay, I think this, literally, I think this is the grace of God handing out to Joash, telling him, look, you need to wake up. What in the world are you doing? Okay, what are you going to do now? Are you going to give up your son to be killed right now for this? I think God is dealing with his heart as far as where he's at himself. But Joash said to all those who stood against him, would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead for himself, because his altar has been torn down. Therefore, on that day they called him Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal plead against him, because he has torn down his altar. He got a new nickname from that day on. It's kind of like Killer, the God Slayer. That's his nickname from now on. They start calling him that. Because what? He's gone in and he tore down this altar and tore down this image. And so guess what? God's going to have to deal with him. Because in his reasoning, he says, look, is he a god or is he just an idol? If he's actually a god, let him do it himself. We don't have to do this. Let him take up his own cause. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east gathered together, and they crossed over and they encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. Then he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him. The people start gathering behind him. They're getting ready to go to war. Curious thing there in verse 34 when it says, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. In the Hebrew, it reads a little different than you see it in English. It literally looks like, and the Spirit of the Lord put on Gideon for a cloak. He's wearing a Gideon suit. Okay? The Spirit of God is in him. And what starts happening is he starts gathering, and all the different tribes are now coming out to gather behind him. They're defeated people, but now there's somebody here the Lord is obviously with, and his Spirit is inside him. In fact, what we see is Gideon, but it's God inside him that's giving him the power and insight and wisdom and strength to do, because you know about him before, right? He's a coward. But look what the Lord is doing. The Lord can take each and every one of us, where we're at, things we wrestle with, things that maybe even defeat us, and he doesn't look at us that way. He looks at us the way he wants us to be, what his will is for our life. We just need to trust him. There's some things that are about to come up in his life. Tearing down that altar, that was a pretty big step, but brother, you got 135,000 men waiting to kill you. And you have this new relationship with this God who's demonstrated himself to you. But guess what? You've got this army yourself. Okay, we're pretty good. We've got 32,000 people here. That's a pretty formidable. You got 135,000 waiting to kill you. The odds are not in your favor. And then God tells you, you got too many. You said what? So we need to dwindle this down. Well, let's ask a common question here. Any of you guys afraid to go to war? You can leave. And you would think, okay, a couple hundred get up. No. It's like a herd of cattle leaving. They're out of there because they know the odds are not in their favor. The odds are they're about to get wiped out and slaughtered. So all these people leave, and God still tells him, still got too many. Why would God tell him something like that? Because he knows he's dealing with broken people. And he knows if by chance, it's not by chance because the Lord's going to win this victory, but what will be the outcome of that? They might think in their own heart, we actually did it, man. We actually did it. Look what we did with our own hands. Instead of giving God the glory, the odds were still within. You get enough trained people,
spread out. You can spread them pretty wide if they're trained really well, and you can do a lot of pretty spectacular things. So God doesn't. Still got too many. We need to dwindle this down. I've been to the places what we're talking about in here. I've been there to the Jezreel Valley. I've been there to this place that God is about to take him, to this spring where the next test comes, where God is going to dwindle his numbers down to 300. 300 against 135,000. Okay, now we got it about right now, because there's no way anybody could say, well, look what we did. Because if God doesn't show up, we're dead. And we're dead quickly. But these are brutal people, so it might not be so quickly. And in fact, these odds are so staggering, there's no way. What are you going to do? Especially when you get the game plan. If you're a military person and you're setting out, you have your own war room. Okay, we're going to put this battle together, and here's what we're going to do. And God enters and says, here's the plan. We're going to get some clay pots. And we're going to make a bunch of noise, and we're going to throw them on the ground. These are trained armies we're going against, and this is God's plan. Because that was the only thing they could see. But from God's vantage points from up top, and he let him hear a little bit about it. Because he started getting fearful again. So the Lord, let me let you in on something. Go check them out, and you're going to see they're more afraid of you than you are of them. And that's exactly what they find out. As they go over there, he goes over there. Well, if you need to take your son, he's coming with me. I'm not going alone. There was not even a heartbeat. But when the Lord said, okay, you can take this guy, take him, he's gone. He's there with him. And then they start hearing this story about a dream. And these people inside this camp are even saying, man, that's the sword of Gideon. Man, we're in trouble. What do you think was going on in his heart when he heard that? Oh, man, the Lord is on our side. So if we're going to go crash clay pots and scream to chase 135,000 people with not that many more people than we have in this room right here. If the Lord's in it, he's in it. You can read through the detail of the account. And as now people are just coming out of the mountains. In fact, at one point, Gideon gets chewed out for not letting some of the tribes know up in the mountains. Hey, how come you didn't tell us about this? We want to join too. You know, sometimes when you step out in faith, not everything's going to go your way. And some people are going to misunderstand things. And it was actually more revealing that why didn't they know about all this? They should have known about this already. But okay, we'll call it my mistake, my bad. But let's get after it. Let's get to what God has called us to. 135,000 people this group is chasing from border to border and border, and carcasses are dropping all along the way. The Lord raised up this man, a very fearful man, and called him what God had for him to be, a warrior. And he was going to start him out doing something that I'm sure he was very fearful of, and that was literally challenging his father. Challenging his father to what he had handed off to him as far as knowing God. Because what he had known was maybe some stories about the one true living God who delivered them out of slavery. But what's going on now before my eyes? You're serving another God. And God's first order for him is to go tear down that idol. Tear it down, set up another altar. In fact, sacrifice one of your father's animals to me there. There's no going back now. We lit the bridge on fire, and then we blew it up. There's no going back. I think that's how we need to be with God. Don't make a plan of escape. Don't make an escape route back to the world. Trust him. He will be there with you. He'll never leave you. He's never going to forsake you. And I don't care how old you are or how young you are. He's got things planned out for you. He's got a plan for your life all the way through the end, to run through the tape at the finish line, serving him, glorifying him all along the way. If you have some chance a little bit later on, read through these different chapters of Judges. You'll see each one of these judges, they were a peculiar group. They all had things that you would say, well, this is a handicap. They're not going to be able to be used of God. Oh, this guy, well, who is he? But look what God did with them. But the people needed a deliverer because they needed to have a connection back to God, because they had turned their back on God. Even though they had heard, and their parents and their grandparents had lived through dramatic ways that God had shown himself. But until you experience it yourself, those are all rumors. I went to church for over 20 years before I actually came to know the Lord. I've been brought up in church, gone to the church schools, all this stuff, but I didn't know God till in my 20s when I finally surrendered my life to him. I can still recall that night like it was yesterday, because my life changed that night. Nothing big dramatic happened there. I had to ask my brother how to pray. Gone to church for over 20 years, but I didn't know how to pray. And he just read a short amount of scripture to me and said, is this what you want? And that's what I need, but I don't know how to get there. But even after that, so what happens after that? Once we have God in our life, he still wants to, as Paul writes, every day shape and mold us more into the image of Jesus Christ. He's going to use those experiences. He's going to use those things that we think are handicaps. He's going to use those things to make us as our strength if they're surrendered to him. He becomes a mighty, powerful warrior. He begins hiding underground. Hiding. Doing a job you can't do underground very well. I wonder how long you have to do all that to get, because there's no wind going across there. How are you going to separate the chaff from the wheat? Just throwing it up in the air unless there's a wind to blow all the chaff away. But he could see that easier than him climbing out of that hole and doing that on a mountainside where he can be seen by the enemy. And at the beginning of that chapter, what was going on? They were going through there and eating all their food and trampling down what was left for them, and the people were starving. They were discouraged, and they lost their hope. God wants us all to have hope in him. Not in ourselves, not in our own thinking, not in our clever ways to figure out things, because his way may come out of left field completely. In fact, it might not even be in the stadium. It's so far out in left field. You want me to do what? I'll be with you. In fact, you know what? I'm going to wrap you around me. It's going to be me inside of you, and watch what happens. Strap in. It's going to be might be a little bumpy ride. Trust me. I'm going to glorify you. I'm going to glorify myself using you to do it. You may see yourself as a fearful failure. By the way, at the beginning of that, when the angel appeared, his father's right there with him. His father is right there with him. His father who had led him astray. And the angel of the Lord appears to him. I'm calling you to come do this powerful thing. What has the Lord called you to? Trust him in it. Step forward in it. By faith, trust him. And watch what he will do.